Ladies, gentlemen, and haradrim of all ages, as we are heading into Season 1 next week, I thought it might be fun to slow down and take a look back at the month and a half of Diablo 4 that we've had so far. Specifically, a look back at the Druid, which is of course my main, and talk about which builds, which playstyles, have just completely dominated the class. The ones that were notably stronger than any others, the ones that people tended to lean towards playing over all else, and the ones that cleared all of the hardest content in the game as well. Essentially what we're doing is saying, hey, these are the big main contenders for the strongest Druid build right now before Season 1, and I want to point it all out now so that we have a strong comparison once Season 1 actually starts happening. Because to me, if the strongest builds in Season 1 itself are pretty much exactly the same as the strongest builds before Season 1 happened, then there's been some kind of failure in this system, right? I want the season to at minimum lead to one of these 5 builds being replaced, ideally 2 or even 3. So let's go over what these builds are, what makes them work, what they are the best at, and all of that fun stuff. First up then, we have number 5, Lightning Shred.
Speed!
This is a build that I affectionately refer to as Bounce Bolt. Essentially, the basis of this is using the enhancement that makes Shred dash with every hit, gives it a nice crit damage multiplier bonus as well. Combine that with the Stormclaw aspect that makes Shred critical hits deal a percentage of their damage as lightning damage around the target, which can also then crit in its own right. Combine that with the Waxing Gibbous unique weapon that makes all of your hits critical for a few seconds after getting a kill with Shred itself. Then combine that with the classic Grizzly Rage, Direwolf aspect, Rampaging Werebeast aspect combo to give you an ultimate that just builds up a stacking crit damage multiplier, sending your damage into the stratosphere, and you get an extremely strong, very competent total build. This is arguably the fastest speed clearing build that Druid has, meaning when you are doing equal level content or near equal level content, such as farming XP by doing nightmare dungeons just 3 levels above your character, this is the one that can just zip through a dungeon the absolute fastest. It basically just teleports to any enemy that you can see on your screen, and it one-shots any weaker mobs that you'll find in this type of content too, so you just zip from one pack of mobs to the next, clearing things out effortlessly and just incredibly quickly. Essentially just holding down the shred button and letting your character do what it wants to clear everything. It's fun, it's cool, and again, it's pretty much the best at that one specific type of content, that one specific way of playing, quickly clearing out near equal level content. It can do stuff that is higher than your level, don't get me wrong, but there's simply much better builds for that. So the main reason that this build makes the list in general is because it is the best at that one specific thing in my eyes. Number 4, Poison Shred. This has a few similarities to the last build, mostly just dashing all over the place with Shred, but where Lightning Shred focuses on the lightning damage and using Waxing Gibbous to get you repeated infinite crit windows and getting through packs as quickly as possible, Poison Shred has a much better high-end potential damage over long fights, which makes it better at higher-end content. Specifically, a variation of this build is actually currently responsible for Druid's fastest Uber Lilith kill time because the single target damage of this is ridiculous, and that kill is also actually only a few seconds off of being the fastest kill time of that challenge boss that any class has, which is quite a notable feat. Essentially the way that this works is by taking the principles of Lightning Shred, but adding in the aspect of the Blurred Beast, which makes it so when you do a dash with Shred, it applies up to 100% of the poison damage that is already ticking away on an enemy as a burst of damage, even more if you put it on an amulet or a two-handed weapon for the boost. The beauty of that is that it does not consume the poison to deal this damage, meaning you still get the tick damage, but also a nice big pop of damage as well. Combine that with the Toxic Claws passive that applies a percentage of your damage as an extra poison dot when you get a crit with a werewolf skill. Then if you crit with a Blurred Beast Shred, it just uses the poison damage that's already applied to amp the poison damage ticking, and it applies even more poison, which in turn amps the next shred that you use, which if that crits as well, amps the poison damage again if you crit, and it just is a sort of infinite feedback loop of increasing damage on a singular target, which is obviously just nasty. This build is even better when you also add in the Stormclaw aspect because it also scales with the Blurred Beast damage if it is a crit, and again the lightning damage from the aspect can crit on top of that, which then also counts as a werewolf skill crit and adds even more poison using the Toxic Claws passive. This one takes a little bit of build up before it hits its big damage windows, which makes it slower than Lightning Shred at clearing lower level content, but the basically never ending stacking build up of damage, especially with the Grizzly Rage combo, makes this build have a much far higher potential than the other Shred build. The only reason this is in 4th place and not higher though, is that the other 3 builds can simply do more than enough damage as well to clear high tier endgame content, but are simply more powerful powerful in defensive ways, also not needing to jump into a pack with Shred to actually clear it, meaning that they are just in less danger of dying at any given point than this build is. Number 3. Pulverize Shockwave.
It's raining bears.
This is the classic Druid build at this point, the one that everyone was running early on after launch and was blasting through things with. This is the only build on the list that doesn't actually need a unique to be incredibly strong. That said, Vasily's Prayer does just push it over the top just a bit, of course. In essence though, this build lets you play permanently in bear form, which comes with tons of defensive benefits from all over the skill tree. But then you get the offensive power of Pulverize, you make Pulverize count as an earth skill as well, so it benefits from the earth passives in the skill tree. You make Pulverize also shoot at a shockwave in a line in front of you, and putting that aspect on a two-handed weapon actually makes the shockwave up to twice as strong as the base damage of the Pulverize itself, and on top of that, you can position yourself in a way when focusing one specific target that they are hit both by the initial slam down and the shockwave off of it, which means that they're taking up to 300% of the normal damage, which is nutty in itself. Again, combine this with Grizzly Rage and Rampaging Werebeast, and you have a burst window of stacking crit multipliers on a massive singular hit type build, and you go around just one-shotting a lot of big enemies pretty consistently, while having all the extra tankiness that comes from being in bear form constantly to back you up. Number 2. Symbiotic Bulwark. I'll be honest, it was hard to not put this in the number 1 slot because it walks through high-end top-tier nightmare dungeons with extreme ease better than anything else. Essentially, this and its variations, such as the one that focuses on having low life to activate damage reduction while injured under a barrier, or the one that uses Cataclysm to amp the damage up even further, are just the strongest druid builds for one specific purpose, which is pushing tier 100 nightmare dungeons. A lot of this seems to be due to some sort of bug though. Innate Earthen Bulwark, the enhancement that makes this normally defensive skill do damage for whatever reason, seems to scale its actual damage itself with the level of the enemy that it hits. It does way more damage to level 150 enemies than it does to level 88 enemies, as an example, not because of differences in gear or differences in skill points or Paragon, but simply because the enemy is higher level. On top of that, you combine the Nature's Fury key passive with the symbiotic aspect on an amulet, and you can essentially just constantly reset the cooldown of Earthen Bulwark by using basic skill spamming, which gives you the strongest offensive ability for high tier nightmare dungeons due to the weird scaling with enemies, but also a stupidly strong defensive ability because with enough ranks and enough of the barrier generation stat, this just gives you your full life as a barrier every time that you cast it, and you can easily cast it once every 2 to 3 seconds at most in combat due to the cooldown reset combo this build is based around. That can make you nearly invulnerable while also doing tons of damage. There are 2 reasons that I didn't put this at number 1, even though it is obviously insane though. The first one is that it is clearly a bug. There is nothing in the game that tells us it is intentional for Earthen Bulwark to deal more damage to enemies at higher levels. But even then, even if that was purposeful, the second reason is because of this scaling, the build only really has one actual purpose. It doesn't kill Uber Lilith well, and while it obviously can clear out lower level nightmare dungeons, it does it much slower than the other top builds. It is essentially only for high tier nightmare pushing and nothing else, even though it does that extremely well. Number 1, Tornado Wolf. Of course this was going to be here. It pretty much has to be. This build is a beautiful mess of spinning plates to create one of the coolest synergy combos just in the game. We take the ideas that I brought up earlier of Grizzly Rage and Rampaging Werebeast with Direwolf to give you a stacking crit multiplier that gets higher every time you get a crit. It reduces the spirit cost of using your core skills so you can span them out even further. Add that on to the fastest hitting core skill that Druid has in Tornado, which also hits multiple times as it just exists after you cast it, and already right there you have the highest possible damage potential, as Tornado will crit far more often than anything else, building this crit multiplier in your burst window of Grizzly Rage to absolutely insane proportions. Combine that with the Earthen Might key passive using the Mighty Storm aspect to make it count for storm skills, and not only do you get a chance to refill your spirit gauge, letting you fire out more tornadoes, it also gives you guaranteed crits for 5 seconds when it procs, which, if it happens multiple times in a row during Grizzly Rage, is how you'll see druids hitting some of the ridiculous numbers that they can with this build. It's just a bunch of lucky procs at the right timing. But even without the procs though, the build is actually still stupidly strong. Not to mention it uses the Toxic Claws passives too, so crits with Tornado apply poison thanks to Tempest Roar, making them also werewolf skills. As well, Tempest Roar gives you a lucky hit chance to gain even more spirit, and of course we combo all of that with Envenom for a crit damage multiplier against poisoned enemies, and then there's also the Elemental Exposure passive, which gives you lucky hit chance to apply vulnerable to enemies with storm skills, and it just creates this beautiful symphony of synergies, applying vulnerable, stacking crit multipliers on a really fast hitting skill with high crit chance, and a surprising amount of tankiness too between Cyclone armor and Savage Hurricane, also gear affixes that can do things like give you tons of bonus armor when in werewolf form, which the build simply is consistently. The build was the first druid build to clear a tier 100 nightmare dungeon, it was the first first Druid build to kill Uber Lilith without any exploits at the very least, and even now it boasts a fantastic 3-minute 25-second kill time on that boss, which is nothing to scoff at. It's pretty much as good in equal level content as it is at high level content. It's just really, genuinely so solid all around. If I had to give this build any sort of weaknesses or negatives, it's that you need to have Tempest Roar for it to just work in the first place, otherwise you just cannot use it, and then you also need a number of max rolled legendaries and just gear with really good stats and rolls in general to make it actually reach its peak. But the peak that this has is the highest in the most diverse amount of content for any Druid build in the game, which is why it's in the spot that it is. And that's it, everyone. I think a large part of this is also pointing out that all of the best Druid builds focus on one of two things: either the Nature's Fury key passive with the symbiotic aspect for super frequent cooldown resetting, or Grizzly Rage with the rampaging werebeast aspect, and then also Direwolf if you're in a wolf-based build. While the latter of the two is the more frequently used one, getting all the stacking crit multipliers, every single strong Druid build is based off of one of those two core concepts, and I hope that some of the balance changes that are coming, or new legendaries or uniques that are coming too, will open it up a little bit more, make some more things for us to build around. I'm not calling for nerfs to either of these base concepts by any means. I think that they're awesome, but I think that we need buffs to other things in a way that makes these just less purely dominant as the only actual base core concepts, because as much as Druid does have build variety, more so than any other class, it has the most viable different builds. To a certain extent though, a lot of that is just sort of flavor differences and visual differences built on two core actual builds, one of which is cooldown resets, and the other one is crit multiplier stacking. In any case, these are the 5 best Druid builds before Season 1, and the big patch hitting right before it as well. They're all a ton of fun in my opinion to actually play. I have played all of them, and I played quite a few more. I really enjoy playing Druid. It is my favorite class in the game as it currently stands, and I can't wait to see what changes in the future for this class, and I genuinely do hope that Season 1 brings with it some new contenders for the top 5 so that we can do a follow-up to this in a month or maybe 2, and just be in awe at how much it has actually changed the list. Like if you liked the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.